I arrived home to discover my dog missing. My mother explained, "We got rid of him. Your siblings' children required fresh devices. You'll manage." I inquired once, "Where did he go?" They dismissed it with chuckles. I didn't. A couple of days afterward, I located him and repurchased him. The following day, upon learning of my actions, they erupted in fury. I can't recall letting go of my keys as I entered. All that sticks in my mind is the quietness. Coda didn't rush over. No woof, no pawing at the entrance, zilch. I shouted his name a single time, no reply. I stepped into the cooking area where my mom stood rinsing dishes as if it were a typical weekday. I questioned her about Coda's location. She avoided eye contact, simply stating, "We disposed of him. Your brother's offspring needed updated gadgets. You'll cope." A rush of emotion hit me, so intensely I clutched the countertop to steady my grip. I repeated the question, assuming I'd misunderstood. She restated it casually, as though he meant zero. I held back from yelling, though I nearly did. My teeth clenched so firmly it ached. I exited abruptly before committing an irreversible act. My father was in the storage space, tinkering with his equipment. I queried him, and he merely shrugged. Mentioned they assumed I'd recover. I scarcely reached my bedroom without banging each portal en route. I perched on my mattress gazing at the vacant enclosure. His lead remained draped on the handle. His playthings sat piled in the nook as if discarded carelessly. That's when the initial surge struck me. Not solely the rage, but the awareness that this wasn't impulsive foolishness. They'd orchestrated it. Treated a living being, one I cherished, like an old pair of shoes, traded for 4 smartphones, for 4 youngsters who shatter displays within a month. Initially, I convinced myself perhaps I was exaggerating. Maybe some distorted rationale existed that I hadn't learned. But recalling her nonchalant delivery, how no one expected me to resist, that's when it dawned on me. They weren't merely self-centered. They truly thought they could seize anything from me, and I'd endure it. Grin, proceed, as usual. But this instance, they selected the incorrect item. I skipped the evening meal. I avoided conversation with anyone. I simply reclined on the bed fixating on the overhead surface, and in that hush, my mindset shifted. I was finished. I activated my computer and began searching. Online marketplaces, social media communities, animal adoption pages. I examined every advertisement within a 200-mile radius. I remained awake throughout the darkness, browsing images, dispatching inquiries, noting locations. I ditched my job the subsequent day. My supervisor messaged. I ignored it. By midday, I spotted him. He appeared under a fresh title, but the gaze matched. One azure, one hazel, identical pale line along the snout. They claimed he needed a new home due to the household's lack of availability. The listing had appeared 7 hours prior. I contacted them right away, stated I could rendezvous that afternoon, offered to exceed their price. The individual consented, suggested a communal green space. I withdrew funds from my reserves and traveled there without informing a soul. Upon spotting him in their vehicle's rear, I vow he knew me prior to uttering his name. I returned him to the residence silently. As I pushed open the main entrance, my mother halted. She remained rooted and gawked as if I'd hauled a specter along the corridor. She uttered, "You retrieved him?" I responded, "No, I reclaimed what you traded." Then I ascended and secured my chamber. They hollered that evening, hammered on surfaces, labeled me theatrical, claimed I spoiled the holiday. I remained silent. I was already scheming the following steps, because if they could exchange my pet for electronics, they could do worse. And they were on the verge of discovering my potential as well. When I descended the next dawn, the cooking space fell mute. My mother prepared flapjacks as if that would wipe away her deed. My father had the screen active but ignored it, merely lounging there scanning a pamphlet as though not anticipating my outburst. They both behaved as if all was normal. No reference to Coda. No remorse. No acknowledgement of error. Just breakfast and trivial chatter. I served myself Java and uttered nothing. Then I retreated to my space and noticed the internet connection altered. My device failed to link. I inspected the modem. Still flashing. Simply barred me. It was trivial. I recognized precisely what it represented. Their form of retribution. I attempted contacting my pal. No signal. Evidently, they'd removed my line from the shared plan, too. Abruptly. No alert. Not even a notice. I lingered there momentarily, eyeing the no coverage indicator atop my display, and experienced this odd serenity. not the positive variety, the sort preceding a blaze. They believed I'd crumble, slink downstairs, express regret, confess to excess sentiment. But they overlooked a fact: the financial profile they utilized for settling obligations. That belonged to me, established in my identity. Several months earlier, my mother persuaded me to convert it to shared because she claimed it simplified matters. She disliked repeatedly requesting transfers for items. Food, services, fuel. Said she detested the inconvenience. I trusted her. She began modestly. $40 occasionally, $60 elsewhere. Then it escalated to $200 online purchases. Recurring fees I didn't identify. Complete refills for my sibling's vehicle. I'd inquired once regarding certain debits. She informed me they benefited the dwelling. I ceased questioning. But now that they'd isolated me as if I were a parasite in their abode, I wasn't merely furious. I was through being accommodating. I accessed it, transferred all funds to a fresh profile created instantly, and revoked her privileges. Then I contacted the institution, described the circumstances, highlighted numerous operations they'd executed. The agent indicated I stood a strong possibility of undoing some since they lacked approval. I reclined and fixated on my device for an extended period. Then I glanced at Coda. He rested on his flank, mouth agape, limbs jerking in slumber. They genuinely assumed they could snatch him from me, and I'd accept it. Not anymore. I seized my satchel, packed necessities, computer, garments, power cords, journals, his restraint, a few of his amusements, and his nourishment. I omitted a message, simply departed, sealed my portal after me, and headed directly to Tessa's. She was a colleague I wasn't deeply familiar with, but she'd consistently shown kindness. On occasions when I complained about domestic issues, she offered her space if I required refuge. I'd always brushed it aside with laughter. This occasion, I didn't. I occupied her sofa the initial evening. Coda nestled at my toes. She refrained from probing, merely provided a cover, and mentioned the spare chamber would be prepared come morning. Near midnight, my device illuminated. I'd swapped to a temporary chip that afternoon. Still accessed the network at Tessa's. Initial communication from my mother. Where have you vanished? Then my father. Amanda, get real. Return. Then my sibling. This concerns the pet. For real? Then once more from my mother. We're concerned for you. I ignored everyone. I positioned myself on the ground with my computer and accessed a confidential housing platform. I commenced browsing accommodations in an entirely separate district. None of them expressed sorrow. None inquired about my well-being. They merely desired my return since I'd complicated their existence. The subsequent day, I received a notification on the prior profile. My mother attempted entry thrice. Denied. She messaged again. What have you done? Then shortly after. You must contact me immediately. Then again. This is absurd. I deactivated my device. They devoted years ensuring my reliance on them. Years inducing shame whenever I sought independence, accumulated funds, pursued autonomy. They disguised it as aiding my stability. But now they were frantic because for the first time they couldn't contact me, couldn't monitor me, couldn't exploit me, and I was merely commencing. By the third day, they began disintegrating. I remained at Tessa's residence, occupying the spare chamber now, striving to maintain discretion, understated. I dedicated much of the day seeking employment, not due to termination, but because I refused to endure another week at a position mere minutes from my parents' abode. Each glance outside, I partially anticipated their arrival. That's their nature. Appear unexpectedly, deliver a grand affection declaration while infusing culpability like toxin beneath each phrase. But this time, they couldn't locate me. They were unaware of my whereabouts. They didn't realize I'd already tendered resignation at my occupation. They didn't comprehend I was severing every connection they'd entwined around my existence since adolescence. And they despised that. It commenced with messages initially from my mother. Amanda, cease this. Then, where are you residing? Are you all right? An hour afterward, you're exaggerating. We harbored no ill intent. Then my father contributed. This isn't problem resolution. We're kin. You don't flee. Then my sibling, you pilfered funds. You cleared the profile. That's wrong. That elicited my amusement. I hadn't pilfered a thing. That profile bore my name. They'd been depleting it for over 12 months like a personal dispenser. Provisions, media services, fuel for vehicles I never operated. Once I discovered a debit from an eatery distant, a meal I was oblivious to. My mother merely stated, "We assumed you'd be okay funding it." They assumed incorrectly. After withdrawing the assets and terminating entry, I submitted a complaint to the institution and began compiling evidence. Captures, records, communications. I was uncertain if legal recourse was necessary, but I desired documentation. I distrusted their avoidance of distorting events into a pity narrative later. And predictably, they attempted revision. When they grasped guilt wouldn't elicit response, they pursued the alternative, mitigation. My Aunt Pam contacted stating she'd learned of the conflict and suggested a group discussion to resolve matters. I questioned if she knew regarding the pet. She affirmed, yes, but they believed it would assist the grandchildren. That revealed her stance entirely. Thus, I initiated another contact. Aunt Betty, my mother's elder kin. She spoke sparingly at gatherings. But when she did, others hushed and heeded. She lacked offspring, spouse, restraint, and apprehension toward anyone, including my parents, particularly my parents. I hadn't conversed with her in over 12 months. But she answered promptly. "Hello, it's Amanda," I declared. I recounted all. I maintained composure, omitted no embellishments. The pet, the devices, the profile, the quietude. I described how they portrayed me as the betrayer, how they viewed me as an asset they'd lost. She refrained from interjecting. Upon conclusion, she uttered merely two phrases. "Reside with me. I'll manage the remainder." I avoided inquiring about management. Unnecessary. That evening, I gathered my belongings from Tess's. Attire, computer, pet carrier, basics. I embraced her farewell, expressed gratitude repeatedly, and entered the vehicle with Coda. He settled in the rear and slumbered majority of the journey. 2 hours later, we arrived at Betty's entrance. Her dwelling bordered a modest community, concealed amid foliage, serene and precise, akin to her. Upon entry, she prepared a spare chamber. Bed arranged, linen stacked, a fresh dish positioned for Coda. She avoided inquiring about my state. Unnecessary. Later that evening, during unpacking, I overheard her device vibrate in the cooking area. Then her tone, subdued and precise. "We require discussion face-to-face. And omit your typical nonsense." I'm not Amanda. I missed the response, but I identified the recipients. Likely both. Betty represented the extreme measure, one they never anticipated I'd employ. And now they'd confront her, not me. I reclined in bed that night. Coda nestled nearby, respiration consistent and comforting. My mother often declared, "Kin remains united regardless." Immediately following an act that prompted my desire to vanish. But as I rested in that tranquil, tidy space, I grasped something I'd never permitted myself to accept. Occasionally kin constitutes the issue. 2 days following my arrival at Aunt Betty's, she entered the spare chamber with a mug of brew and stated, casually, "Avoid scheduling post-midday." Then she departed before clarification. I refrained, I comprehended. I spent the forenoon perusing housing advertisements with Coda's skull on my thigh. He was ultimately unwinding once more. It struck me how vigilant he'd been at the prior residence, perpetually attentive, observing. Now at Betty's, he snored, extended as if carefree. Precisely before 1 p.m., Betty donned her outerwear, seized a dossier from the counter, and instructed, "Maintain your device nearby." Then she exited and departed without further comment. She absented for approximately 90 minutes. Upon return, she remained reticent, merely presented a sack from the local patisserie, stroked Coda's crown, and settled at the table with her brew as if she hadn't engaged in conflict. My device commenced alerting shortly thereafter. My mother initially. "You shouldn't have involved Betty. That was underhanded." Then my sibling. "Impressive, truly grown up. Hope satisfaction abounds." Then my father telephoned, uncommon for him. I ignored. I merely observed the display illuminate until cessation. Betty glanced at the alerts and ultimately disrupted the quiet. They're ashamed. Beneficial. I inquired about her statements to them. She grinned and replied. I refreshed their memory on repercussions for offending someone with total recall. Subsequently, I obtained additional particulars. She entered the residence unannounced. My mother feigned hospitality as if unaltered. My father positioned behind her with that artificial composure he employs when presuming dominance. Betty avoided procrastination. She outlined all. Their actions with Coda. Their exploitation of my finances. their disconnection of my communication and alteration of network. She labeled it accurately, control, and when my mother attempted objection, Betty quelled it. She accused them of viewing me as labor, not progeny, that I wasn't escaping. I was reclaiming existence. She warned that persistent messaging, calling, or profile intrusions would prompt her to publicize every aspect. She claimed prior consultation with a community periodical contact. Likely deception, but considering Betty, unsurprising. Then she informed my father of awareness regarding his unlicensed construction on the storage, and she'd gladly submit images to the regulator. They silenced. She departed, and characteristically for my kin, their conclusion wasn't admission of fault. It was Amanda incited opposition. That evening, as Betty viewed programming, I inspected my correspondence and received a protection notice from my fresh institution. 3 unsuccessful entries. They persisted attempting profile access. Still incredulous, I dared to exclude them. But that wasn't the nadir. Moments later, I received a transfer solicitation from my father. $200, the annotation read. For the costs you owe. I chuckled, not from humor, but due to alignment with their character. That's their essence. Trade my pet, extract from my profile, then demand reimbursement. The following day, I viewed a unit roughly 40 minutes distant. Unpretentious. Upper level, no lift. Odd odor in the passage, but it offered area, illumination, and permitted animals. I committed to the agreement immediately. The proprietor inquired if deliberation time was necessary. I informed him I'd contemplated for years. Upon returning to Betty's that dusk, I informed her of impending relocation. She omitted felicitations, omitted embrace, merely affirmed once and advised, ensure they lack your fresh location. That evening, I rejected the transfer solicitation and restricted my father. I experienced no remorse, not minimally. I felt alert. They still presumed I was venting, that I'd return upon composure, that I'd pardon and overlook as customary. But this occasion differed. This occasion, they weren't solely forfeiting financial access. They were forfeiting access to me. Relocation day seemed dreamlike. I anticipated disruption, a communication from the proprietor, an abrupt message from my mother, anything to retract me, but nil occurred. I executed the documents, obtained the access, and transported the initial container up the confined steps solo. The unit was compact and somewhat unattractive, truthfully. The surfaces bore an odd neutral tint. The cooler emitted a tapping every 10 minutes, and the lounge possessed one dismal ceiling fixture that wavered in excessive silence. But it belonged to me. No one commanding cleanup after others. No one probing absences. No one feigning entitlement for my presence. I positioned on the flooring with Coda, encircled by containers, and merely absorbed the hush. He pressed against me and exhaled as if comprehending. Perhaps he did. I hadn't disclosed my destination to anyone, not even my sibling, particularly not my mother. Solely Aunt Betty aware, and I instructed her to withhold every detail. Not the coordinates, not the locale, not even the code. The initial evening, I slumbered on a loaned pad with a cover scented like Betty's cleaning agent. I awoke to 19 unanswered summons. I lacked that many acquaintances. All originated from my parents, my sibling, his partner, and one unfamiliar. Likely my mother borrowing another's device. Then the communications recommenced. From my sibling, so you vanish on us? That's your tactic now. From my mother, you needn't exist thus. You're theatrical. From my father, dialogue was possible. Observe your creation. I restricted them sequentially. I omitted the final pair. Unnecessary. Then Betty contacted. They appeared here, she stated, composed as always. I remained silent initially. They carried dessert. Can you fathom? Purchased? She described my mother's attempted embrace, my father's positioning like enforcer, and my sibling's silence until Betty prompted speech. He muttered about excess escalation. Betty informed them of my departure and desire for no interaction. She withheld the destination. My mother evidently quieted, plotting subsequent action. She inquired about my safety, if I dated, as if abrupt concern. Then she deployed the genuine ploy. We're prepared to pardon her if she returns. Betty ridiculed openly. She declared no one required their pardon, that I committed no wrong, that it concerned finality, not sentiment. Then she delivered the silencer. If you'd cherished her half as much as dominating her, this wouldn't have transpired. They departed thereafter. Several days later, I discovered a packet squeezed between Betty's mesh portal and veranda. No postage, no sender. Within was a handwritten memo from my mother stating, "You're eternally our offspring. We erred, but that doesn't nullify our contributions. Someday with your own children, perhaps you'll grasp our hardship. Please return so we can advance." There was the characteristic distortion. Our contributions, as if years of utilization validated this. I displayed the memo to Betty. She remained silent, merely ignited the hearth, discarded it, and inquired about brew. That instant I comprehended. Not merely termination with them. I already knew. But termination of justification to anyone. That identical evening, I captured images of my fresh abode. Unelaborate, merely seating, Coda dozing near the pane, a modest rack I assembled. I contemplated momentarily dispatching the images, demonstrating their loss. But then I realized they disregarded me. They regarded access to me. Thus, I dispatched nil. And I resolved there. I would never welcome them. Not for meals, not festivities, not reconciliation, not to display potential inclusion if they'd viewed me humanely rather than financially. I required no turmoil in my space. I required no regrets now that Betty intimidated feigned concern. They'd traded my pet. They'd traded my pet and assumed I'd surpass it for kinship. I selected tranquility instead. And nil they utter or perform will breach my entrance again. 3 months elapsed before awareness. Existence in the fresh unit evolved into this consistent pattern that initially seemed illusory. No shouts at dawn. No treads lingering outside my portal. No arbitrary financial demands masked as obligations. Merely me, my pet, and an inexpensive modest dwelling with wavering illumination that somehow felt more secure than prior residences. Coda adapted swifter than I. He memorized the structure's noises. The resident with sturdy footwear. The youth above who adored dropping objects. The aged cooler that rumbled like a weary creature. He'd nestle beside the seating nightly, extend his limbs across my thigh, and doze as if unfamiliar with anything but calm. I believe that's when it impacted most, his newfound serenity, because their actions toward me extended to him. The initial indication of my kin's persistence arrived one weekend morning. Someone activated my structure's entry buzzer. The tone reverberated through the corridor, strange and piercing. I anticipated no visitors. No shipments, no repairs. I halted mid-task, wiping a skillet. The alert sounded twice additionally. I peered through the street-facing pane. I unrecognized the female awaiting at the ingress. She clutched a tiny tan container delicately. She omitted her identity when queried via the intercom. Merely stated a package for Amanda. I denied entry. She deposited the container near the receptacles and departed without glance. Within was a mounted image of me, my parents, and my sibling from a distant warm season. I appeared youthful. My mother embraced us both, and I grasped a dissolving frozen treat. A memo adhered to the rear. "We long for you. Contact us. Discuss." No author, but unnecessary. I replaced the mount in the container and stowed it in storage. Disposal felt improper, but display was impossible. 2 days thereafter, I replaced the locks. A week following, I received correspondence on the obsolete profile I seldom monitored. It was extensive, nearly a composition. My mother authored it. She discussed festivities, how the youngsters queried my absence, how father struggled. She mentioned introspection. For a brief moment, I anticipated remorse. Absent. The nearest was, "We've erred, but you've complicated matters by abrupt isolation." Then the decisive, regardless of events, "We merited no such treatment from Betty. You ought to have addressed us confidentially rather than shaming us." Again, no contrition, no comprehension, merely mortification. They regretted outcomes, not deeds. I abstained from response. I terminated the message and eradicated the profile entirely. All connections to them vanished instantly. My existence now diverges vastly from their dominance. I operate distantly with fresh employment, avoiding their vicinity. I escort Coda on extended strolls pre-dusk. I enrolled in imagery instruction centrally, and most weekends I return with heaps of impressions cluttering the meal surface. A flora on the ledge survives. I organized a film evening solo last weekday, without elevated tones in the edifice. Each day resembles a destination previously forbidden. Naturally, some evenings I lounge on the seating and ponder my alternate self under different treatment. If they'd requested rather than commanded, if they'd cherished rather than exploited. But the notion dissipates identically. If they'd cared, I wouldn't reside here. The tranquility is odd, but mine. I never provided my fresh location. Never disclosed the relocation city. Never responded to summons or messages. And as the quiet prolongs, it simplifies. Individuals describe kin severance as incinerating a structure. For me, it resembled exiting one and permitting the portal to seal behind.